What if the person you lost decades ago walked back into your life, unchanged, untouched by time, and standing in your kitchen as if nothing had ever happened? In the middle of rural Nebraska, where life moves slow and secrets sink deep into the soil, one farmer was about to come face to face with a voice he thought he'd never hear again. It wasn't just the sound that froze him. It was the impossible familiarity. The kind that grabs you by the throat and refuses to let go. She didn't arrive with thunder or fanfare, just an old truck, dusty boots, and a calmness that didn't match the storm she was about to stir. Nobody knew her. She gave no last name, but the moment she spoke, the past kicked open a door that had been locked for over 50 years, and Jack Halloway, the man who had buried more than memories, was forced to ask himself, is it possible for someone to return, not from the dead, but from time itself? What happened on that farm wasn't just strange, it was unforgettable. Jack Halloway rose with the sun, like he did every morning for the last 40 years. The sky above his Nebraska farm burned soft orange as the dew steamed off the fields. It was early April, the kind of morning that made you forget winter ever happened, but this morning would be different, though Jack didn't know it yet. The truck rumbled into the driveway just after 7 a.m., kicking up a small tornado of dust as it came to a stop beside the barn. Jack watched from the porch, coffee in hand, eyebrows drawing together. He hadn't been told she'd arrive this early. A woman stepped out, mid-30s maybe. Slim, with auburn hair pulled into a loose bun and a red checkered bandana tied around her neck like something out of a 1950s diner ad. She stood still for a moment, taking in the landscape like someone who had been here before and was just making sure it hadn't changed too much. Jack narrowed his eyes. "Morning," she called, walking toward the house with a smile that wasn't quite forced, but wasn't completely natural either. "I'm Clara, from the agency." Her voice floated across the yard, light and syrupy. Jack's breath caught, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. There was something in the lilt, a rhythm, a memory, uninvited. He blinked. "You're early." She shrugged. "Didn't think you'd mind." Inside, the farmhand David offered to help with her bags. She declined, insisting she didn't bring much. As she stepped into the kitchen, Jack remained on the porch, unmoving. A name rose in his throat but never made it out. Clara began to hum as she unpacked in the kitchen. A soft tune, familiar, too familiar. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Jack dropped his coffee. He moved slowly, as if in a dream, toward the open window. The melody was the same, the way she hit the lower notes, the slight drag on sunshine. It was exact. It was Lillian's voice. But that was impossible. "Lillian?" he whispered to no one. The humming stopped. Silence swallowed the kitchen. Then her voice returned, now speaking to David. "Would you mind pointing me toward the pantry, sugar?" There it was again. That word, sugar. Only one person had ever called him that in that exact way. He turned abruptly and walked to the barn, trying to shake it off. It was nothing. A coincidence. A woman from the South, maybe. People still said things like that. But something else was scratching at the back of his mind, something he couldn't place yet. Later that afternoon, Clara stood by the garden, hands on her hips, looking out toward the cornfield. "This place," she said, "feels older than it looks." Jack looked up from his work. "That a compliment or a warning?" She smiled. "Just an observation." Then under her breath, so soft he almost missed it. "Some things here don't ever really go away." Jack stood still, rake frozen in midair. "What did you say?" She looked at him, confused or pretending to be. He shook his head. "Never mind." That night, Jack sat at the kitchen table long after dinner, staring at the spot where Clara had stood earlier. He couldn't shake the sensation. Her voice wasn't just familiar. It was exact. Every syllable, every rise and fall in tone. It was her. But how could that be? He opened an old drawer, pulling out a weathered photo tucked beneath receipts and junk mail. It was a black and white shot, edges curling, taken in 1970. A woman in a sundress smiled at the camera. Jack traced the photo with his thumb. "You're gone," he muttered. But the voice in his mind whispered back, "Not entirely." The morning after Clara's arrival, the farm awoke under a low mist, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Jack tried to move through his routine as usual, feed the chickens, check the fences, inspect the irrigation line, but something had lodged in his mind like a stone in his boot. That voice. He passed the kitchen window again, deliberately slow. Clara stood inside, her back to him, stirring something on the stove. The radio was off, and yet she sang softly to herself. Not just any song. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." Jack stopped mid-step. His boots sank into the mud, forgotten. His hand dropped the fencing wire. That voice, it wasn't like Lillian's, it was Lillian's. The exact cadence, the way she breathed between the lines, even the slight break in her voice at the word love. It was as if time hadn't moved an inch since that cold winter of 1970. Inside the kitchen, Clara stopped humming, as if she knew. He walked in, pushing open the screen door. It creaked the same way it always did. Clara turned, her eyes calm. "Morning, Jack. Hungry?" He didn't answer at first, just stared. "Where did you learn that song?" She smiled, eyes twinkling as she flipped a pancake. "Oh, just something from my childhood. Old tune, right? That version, that phrasing. You don't hear it that way anymore." She shrugged. "Maybe I'm just old-fashioned." Jack stepped closer, his brow heavy with suspicion. "Where did you grow up?" She paused, just for a moment. Not long, but long enough. "Mississippi. Little town you've never heard of. Lots of music, lots of porch swings." Mississippi. Lillian had claimed the same place. "I used to know someone from there," Jack said slowly, watching for her reaction. "A long time ago." "Small world," she said, not looking at him. Jack nodded, though nothing about it felt small. "Her name was Lillian." Now Clara looked at him. "Pretty name." Jack leaned on the counter. "She had your voice." Clara's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened around the spatula. "Lucky woman." "She disappeared," Jack said, voice low. "One night, after a fight. No trace. It's been over 50 years. Clara placed a plate on the counter with careful hands. "And yet you remember her voice that clearly." He didn't blink. "Exactly that clearly." She held his gaze for a long beat. Then, lightly, "Voices are funny things. Sometimes they travel farther than we expect." Before he could answer, David entered the kitchen, breaking the tension. "Smells amazing in here," he said, nodding toward Clara. "You're gonna spoil us." Clara laughed, soft, controlled. "Spoiling's half the job." Jack stepped back. "I've got fences to check." As he walked away, he heard her humming again. It wasn't just the same tune. It was the same moment all over again, like the air remembered her too. Later that afternoon, Jack opened the old cedar chest in the storage shed. Inside, beneath a folded American flag and some World War II medals, he found what he was looking for. Lillian's voice, preserved in ink. Her letters, faded, fragile, but still legible. He read one slowly. It began like they always did. "Dearest Jack, I dreamed of you again. The wind whispered your name." Jack closed his eyes. That same phrase. Clara had said it yesterday. The wind carries things we don't expect. This wasn't coincidence anymore. He stood and looked toward the house. He wasn't chasing ghosts. They were finding him. Jack stood at the edge of the field, staring into the distance as the wind tugged gently at his worn flannel shirt. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the cornstalks, but he wasn't seeing any of it. He was listening, hoping to hear it again, that impossible voice. Lillian's voice. By mid-morning, he decided to drive into town. There were questions eating at him, and no answers out here among the soil and silence. He stopped at the local diner, where the bell above the door jingled like it had every day for the last 30 years. "Morning, Jack," said Marlene, the gray-haired waitress who'd known him since high school. "Usual coffee?" "Sure." he said, sliding into a booth. Then he leaned forward. "You ever meet the new girl working at my place?" Marlene poured the coffee and shrugged. "Heard she's some kind of chef. From Mississippi, they say. Pretty, real polite. But she keeps to herself." "Why?" Jack hesitated, fingers tapping the ceramic cup. "She reminds me of someone I used to know. Someone I lost." Marlene gave him a long, careful look. "That's a dangerous kind of reminder, Jack." "I know." Later, he walked to the county records office. Clara had filled out her employment forms with minimal information, and Jack wanted more. But when he asked the clerk to pull her file, she frowned. "There's almost nothing here," she said. "Just a temporary ID and a contact number that doesn't connect." "You sure she came from the agency?" "That's what they told me," Jack said, frowning. The clerk lowered her voice. "We've had people come through here before, folks passing through. But this one? Feels like she's not passing through. Feels like she's arriving." Back at the farm, Jack climbed into the attic. It was stifling and dusty, but something tugged him upward. He knelt by an old trunk, his mother's, and began to dig. Beneath piles of faded linens and a box of postcards was a manila envelope. He opened it slowly. Inside was a black-and-white photograph, curled at the edges, dated July 4th, 1948. It was a family picnic, but there off to the side stood a young woman in a polka-dot dress. Her face was unmistakable. Clara, or rather, a woman who looked exactly like her. He flipped the photo over. Written in neat cursive, "Lillian, summer guest from Mississippi." Jack sat back hard. He remembered this photo. His mother had told him the woman was a cousin's friend, visiting briefly, but he'd never looked closely, never noticed the eyes, the smile, the shape of her mouth. It was Clara, and it was Lillian. But the photo was from 20 years before Lillian had first walked into Jack's life. That night, he confronted Clara in the barn. "You've been here before," he said. She turned, calmly brushing hay from her apron. "Excuse me. In 1948. There's a photo. You look exactly the same." She tilted her head. "Maybe I just have one of those faces." "No," Jack said, stepping closer. "Not a similar face. The same face, the same voice. I don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe in you. And you're not telling me everything." Clara looked at him for a long time, then softly, "Maybe some stories aren't meant to be told all at once." She walked past him, gently brushing his arm. And again, that word. "Good night, sugar." Jack stood frozen in the hay-scented air. The past wasn't chasing him. It had arrived. In towns like Wilburn, Nebraska, whispers traveled faster than telephone signals. Jack knew that. And yet, he hadn't expected them to start so quickly. By the end of the week, Clara's name was already in the mouths of half the county. At the feed store, 2 old men leaned over a barrel of nails, murmuring like conspirators. "She's got a funny way about her," said one. "Talks like she was born in another century. Don't know how she knows so much about that old Holloway place," the other added. "Heard she walked into the pantry her first day and pulled out the hidden flour bin like she'd built the house herself." Jack overheard this as he picked up fencing wire, pretending not to listen, but inside he was boiling, not at them, at the fact that he didn't have a single argument to defend her. Back at the farm, Clara moved like she'd always belonged there. Her rhythm matched the creaks of the house, her routines slipped perfectly into place. She made his mother's chili recipe without asking, replaced a loose porch board he hadn't touched in 20 years. Jack tried to catch her off guard. "So, who taught you to cook like that?" he asked one morning. She smiled, slicing apples. "An old woman. Wise, stubborn, always barefoot in the kitchen. Sound like someone I knew. Maybe we had the same teacher," she said. That same morning, Mrs. Delaney, who ran the town library, dropped by the farm with a gift. A cookbook from the 1930s Jack's mother had once donated. Clara accepted it with grace, but her eyes didn't flicker with surprise. Instead, she opened it right to a page, caramel bread pudding, and whispered, "Still bookmarked." Jack didn't miss that. Later, in the hardware store, he ran into Tom Brewster, a neighbor from 2 properties over. Tom leaned against the counter with a knowing look. "She's something, huh?" Tom said. Jack didn't answer. "You ever think maybe she's not who she says she is?" Jack folded his arms. "You think she's dangerous?" Tom shrugged. "No, but strange ain't always harmless." That night, Jack sat on his front porch as Clara watered the rose bushes near the steps. The moon lit her profile in silver. "Why here?" he asked. She looked up. "What do you mean?" "Out of all the farms, out of all the places." She smiled, soft. "Maybe I was called." "By who?" She didn't answer. Jack studied her. "People are talking." "Let them," she said. "They're not the ones who remember." "Remember what?" Clara stood and brushed off her hands. "Some memories aren't borrowed. They're lived again." As she turned to go inside, Jack felt a sudden chill despite the warm night. The next morning, David, the farmhand, approached him quietly in the barn. "Boss, something weird. I was in town yesterday. That lady, you know, Clara, someone swore they saw her at a church revival in 1969. Same face, same name, said she sang like an angel." Jack stared at him. "That's impossible." David nodded. "I know, that's what makes it stick." Jack didn't sleep that night. He stayed up reading through old letters, newspapers, anything he could find that might place Lillian or Clara in 2 places at once. And still, no answers, only whispers, and the hum of a familiar voice drifting through the floorboards like it had. The attic smelled of dust, mothballs, and old wood, suffocating and still. Jack hadn't climbed those narrow steps in over a decade, but something inside him insisted. Something unshakable. Clara had said nothing direct, but her presence had stirred shadows too specific to ignore. He lifted the lid of an old cedar chest, its hinges groaning like a warning. Inside were remnants of a life left behind. His mother's gloves, faded hymn books, yellowing newspapers. He dug deeper. At the bottom, wrapped in a quilt, was a leather-bound photo album. He opened it slowly, each page a fragile breath of time. Baby photos, summer barbecues, a Thanksgiving table from 1964. Then he turned to a black-and-white photo dated July 4th, 1948, and froze. There, standing beside his mother in front of a checkered blanket, was a woman in a sleeveless polka-dot dress. Young, beautiful, auburn hair tied back. The exact same eyes, nose, smile. Clara. But that couldn't be. Jack hadn't even been born when this picture was taken. He flipped the photo over. In elegant cursive, Lillian, summer guest from Mississippi. He sat down hard on the floor, the wooden boards creaking beneath his weight. Lillian. It wasn't just a name, it was her. Somehow, impossibly, her. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. That girl had a sadness about her, like she'd seen too many seasons pass too quickly. Later that afternoon, Jack waited until Clara returned from the garden. He held the photograph in his hand, gripping it like proof against madness. "I want to show you something," he said. She raised an eyebrow but followed him to the living room. He placed the photo on the table. She looked at it, quietly. No flicker of denial, no feigned surprise. "You knew her," he said. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "I was her." Jack felt the breath catch in his lungs. "That's not possible." Clara looked at him, really looked. "Isn't it? You're the same. You haven't aged a day. I didn't have a choice." Jack stepped back. "What are you?" "I'm not a ghost," she said. "Not in the way you think." He sat down, hands shaking. "I buried you. I mourned you. And you show up here, cooking in my kitchen, singing our song like the last 50 years didn't happen." Clara knelt beside him. "They happened. To you. To me, they happened differently." "What does that even mean?" She looked toward the window, the golden light catching the side of her face. "There are places, moments, where time doesn't move in a straight line, where grief holds so tightly to someone that it bends the rules to let them speak again." Jack stared at her. "And you... what? You walked out of time?" "No," she said. "Time let me through. They sat in silence. Outside, the wind rustled through the fields like distant voices. Finally, Clara rose. "You kept this photo," she said. "I kept everything," he replied. She smiled. "That's why I found my way back." Jack didn't know what to say. His heart thundered, his thoughts tumbled. Was this real? A dream, a trick of an aging mind? But she was there, breathing, warm, real. And he wasn't ready to let her go again. Not yet, never left. Winter in 1970 had come early to Wilburn. The first snowfall dusted the fields by mid-October, and by November, the land was buried under white silence. Jack was 21, fresh-faced, and still believed in things like fate. That was the winter he met Lillian. She arrived on the back of a motorcycle, helmet in hand, leather jacket zipped up to her throat. She walked into town like she belonged there, though no one had ever seen her before. She didn't say much, but when she did, her voice stopped conversations. Jack met her at the town's harvest dance. She wore a green dress and smelled like lilacs and road dust. When she spoke, her words curved like rivers, slow, southern, deliberate. "You're not from around here," he said. She smiled. "Does it show?" He offered to walk her home. She accepted. For the next 3 months, they were inseparable. He took her to his favorite fishing spot. She taught him to dance barefoot in the snow. They made apple butter from his mother's recipe and whispered secrets beside the fireplace. One night, as wind howled against the windows, she placed her hand on his chest and said, "If anything ever happens to me, don't stop listening to the wind. It'll carry my voice back." He laughed. "Don't say things like that." "I mean it," she said. "Promise me." "I promise." December 27th. That was the last night he saw her. They'd had an argument, something about the future, about her refusal to tell him where she came from, what she was running from. She'd raised her voice, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I can't stay," she shouted. "I wasn't meant to." He grabbed her hand. "What does that even mean?" She looked at him with a sorrow he couldn't name. "Some of us aren't allowed to belong anywhere." She kissed him hard, then turned and vanished into the snow. He searched for days. The police found nothing. No footprints, no bike tracks, no trace she'd ever been there. It was like she'd never existed. But Jack knew. The way her voice had echoed in the wind, the way her laughter had clung to the trees, she had existed, and she had promised she would return. Back in the present, Jack sat in the barn, staring at the same green scarf she had left behind, the only thing they'd found in the snow. He held it to his face. It still smelled like lilacs. Clara walked in, quiet as ever. "You're remembering?" she said. He didn't ask how she knew. "You said you weren't allowed to stay," he whispered. "Back then," Clara nodded. "And now?" "I don't know," she said. "This time feels different." "Why did you come back?" "I didn't choose to. I was called." "By who?" She looked at him with eyes full of stories she hadn't told. "Maybe by you. Maybe by time itself." Jack reached out, brushing her fingers. "You said the wind would carry your voice." "And didn't it?" she asked. They sat there, barn walls creaking around them, hay rustling like memory. Jack closed his eyes. The coldest winter had returned, but it had brought something back with it. Jack cooked dinner that night, his hands moving automatically through motions he hadn't performed in years. Clara had done all the cooking since she arrived, but tonight he needed the distraction. He couldn't stop thinking about the barn, about her eyes, her voice, her being here. He set the table with the old floral plates his mother used for Sunday guests. As he ladled stew into bowls, Clara stepped into the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "Something smells like memory," she said. Jack looked up. "Don't you mean nostalgia?" She tilted her head. "No, nostalgia is when you miss something. This is when it comes back." They ate in silence for a few minutes. The stew was thick with root vegetables and beef, hearty and warm, but every bite was weighted with unspoken questions. "You always eat this slow?" Jack asked finally. Clara smiled. Only when I'm trying to remember the first time I tasted something." He set down his spoon. "Let's talk." "All right," she said, folding her napkin. "You walk through this house like you've lived here." She said nothing. "You know my mother's apple pie recipe. You knew the flour bin was behind the third pantry shelf. You knew where I keep the matches in the barn." Still, she didn't respond. "I've lived here my whole life. No one knows those details unless—" "I've been here before," Clara finished. Jack stared. "You admit it. I've never denied it." He leaned forward. "But how? Why? What are you?" "I don't know what word fits. I've asked myself for years," she said. "All I know is that something unfinished called me back." "What was unfinished?" "You." The room fell into stillness, broken only by the ticking clock over the stove. Jack rose and retrieved something from the hutch. A letter. Faded. Creased. "You left this behind," he said. "In 71. Clara took it with trembling fingers. "I remember writing it. I never knew it survived. You never mailed it. I never had the chance." She opened it, eyes scanning the lines she'd written over half a century ago. Then she began to cry, quiet tears that rolled slowly down her cheeks. Jack sat back down. "You were going to tell me everything, weren't you?" "I was. But something stopped me. Or maybe took me." She folded the letter and placed it on the table. "That day, something pulled me away. Not death, not time. Something in between. I was gone before I could say goodbye. And now you're here. For as long as I'm allowed." Jack reached across the table, his weathered hand covering hers. "I never stopped waiting." Clara looked at him, eyes shimmering. "I know. That's why I found you." Later, as she washed the dishes, she sang to herself again, softly, almost a whisper, not a full song this time, just the words. "You'll never know, dear." Jack sat in the doorway listening, unable to move. The air was thick with echoes. Dinner had ended, but ghosts still lingered at the table. The next morning brought a heavy rain. It tapped against the roof like impatient fingers and turned the dirt paths of the farm into thin rivers of mud. Jack stayed inside, restless. The events of the previous night echoed in his bones, vibrating under his skin. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting to be uncovered. Mid-morning, he found himself in the kitchen alone. Clara had gone into town, claiming she needed baking powder. Jack didn't believe her. He suspected she needed space. He needed answers. He wandered, touching surfaces she had touched, searching for something he didn't know how to name. When he reached the pantry, a draft hit his cheek. Odd, the pantry was never drafty. He knelt down and tapped on the floorboards. One sounded different, hollow. Using a butter knife, he pried it open. Inside was a compartment, no larger than a shoebox. Dust swirled in the air as he reached inside and pulled out a yellowed envelope wrapped in oilskin. His hands trembled as he opened it. A letter. "Jack, they won't let me stay much longer. Something is pulling me. Something that doesn't answer to time or reason, but I needed to say goodbye. I needed you to know I loved you. And if I could return, I would, in one way or another. Don't forget the apple pie. Yours, always." Lily and Jack sat on the floor, staring at the letter, heart pounding. The handwriting was unmistakable. It matched the grocery lists Clara had written the past 2 weeks. Curves, loops, the slant of the Y in yours. Identical. She had written this 50 years ago? And yesterday. He didn't realize Clara had returned until she spoke behind him. "I wondered if you'd find it." He turned slowly. "You hid it." "I left it," she said, "for the version of you that would need it most." Jack rose, gripping the letter. "So it's true, all of it. You were here, then gone, and now I came back. I wasn't supposed to, but I did." "Why?" She stepped closer. "Because you remembered me. That's all it took?" She nodded. "Sometimes memory is stronger than time, stronger than rules, strong enough to pull someone back." Jack paced. "You're not just here, Clara. You're real, solid. This isn't a dream." "No," she said softly. "This is what happens when love doesn't die properly." Jack stopped. "That's what this is?" She looked up at him, eyes shining. "You never let me go, and I never stopped trying to return." He stared at her, the weight of 5 decades pressing against his ribs. Then he laughed, short, broken. "You told me to remember the apple pie." Clara smiled through her tears. "And you did." They sat in silence, the letter between them like a bridge across time. Outside, the rain lightened. A beam of sun broke through the clouds, warming the kitchen window. For a moment everything stood still, past and present, holding hands. Clara reached for his hand. "I don't know how long I have." Jack gripped her fingers. "Then let's make it count." In that moment, there were no questions left, only the truth of what had been lost, and finally, impossibly, found. The sky the next morning was sharp and cloudless. A deceptive calm stretched over the fields. Jack stood by the fence line, eyes locked on the horizon. Inside him, everything trembled. He'd lived through war, drought, the death of his parents. None of it prepared him for what Clara was. He found her in the sewing room, folding linens that hadn't been touched in decades. "I need to know," he said, his voice low but steady. She turned slowly. "I know. You said you weren't exactly Lillian." "I'm not," she replied. "But I carry her memories, her love, her regrets." Jack stepped closer. "What does that mean?" Clara folded the last cloth carefully, like it was something sacred. "When Lillian disappeared, she didn't die. She was taken by something older than time, something that doesn't work the way we understand." He blinked. "Taken by what?" She looked at him, her eyes suddenly vast. "I don't have a name for it. Some call it a current, others a loop. But it holds moments, people, pieces of them, especially when the feelings tied to them are unresolved." "You mean love?" She nodded. "And loss. Pain leaves echoes, and echoes can become doors." Jack sat down, his legs weak. "So you're what? A ghost?" "A memory come to life." Clara sat beside him. "I'm what she became when time couldn't decide what to do with her. And your memory, your pain, it called me back." "Why now?" "Because you're finally ready to let go." He stared at her. "Is that what this is? A goodbye?" Clara's voice broke. "Not yet." Silence pressed in, thick and intimate. Jack reached out and touched her cheek. It was warm, real. "You've been here for weeks," he said. "Living like nothing was strange." "Every moment with you has been a gift," she whispered. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I didn't want the clock to start." Jack frowned. "What do you mean?" "Once the truth is spoken," she said, "the loop begins to close." He stood pacing. "So you're leaving?" "Yes." "When?" "I don't know, but soon." His breath caught. "Then what's the point? Why come back at all?" She stood, her voice rising. "Because you needed peace. You needed to know it wasn't your fault, that I didn't leave because I stopped loving you." He turned away, eyes burning. She stepped behind him, resting her hand on his back. "You've lived your whole life with a wound you didn't cause. I came back to sew it shut." Jack turned slowly, his face breaking. "I never stopped waiting." "I know." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in a silence louder than any storm. Finally, Jack spoke. "Will I remember this?" "When you're gone?" Clara nodded. "Every word, every breath." "And you?" "I've never forgotten." He closed his eyes, held her tightly, afraid to let go. "Then stay a little longer. I'll stay until the wind calls me again." Outside, the air shifted, but inside the old farmhouse, time paused for love one final time. Jack awoke to an eerie stillness, the kind of quiet that feels intentional, the kind that follows something sacred. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of his bedroom, softer than usual, as if it too was morning. The other side of the bed was empty. He got dressed slowly, dreading the silence that waited downstairs. As he stepped into the kitchen, his breath caught, Everything was in its place, her apron folded neatly on the chair, the coffee already brewed. But Clara was gone. No note, no goodbye, just absence. He checked every room, every corner, even the attic, empty. Finally, on the kitchen table, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A small cassette tape in a clear plastic case. No label, just his name written in delicate script across the top. Jack. With shaking hands, he placed it into the old player his mother had kept since the 1980s. The machine clicked, then hissed, then her voice. Jack, if you're hearing this, it means I had to go. He gripped the edge of the counter, heart pounding. I didn't want to, not really. But the moment came. You always said goodbye should come with words. This is all I can give you. The sound of her breath filled the space, soft like wind through wheat fields. I came back because something about you never let go. That kind of love doesn't vanish. It echoes. I don't know where I'll go now. Maybe back into that place between seconds. Maybe nowhere. But I was real. What we had was real. A pause. Then a whisper. Don't mourn me, Jack. Remember me. Not the mystery. Not the loss, but the girl who danced barefoot in the snow, the one who sang your name into the wind. His eyes blurred. Goodbye, sugar. Click. Silence. Jack sat at the table for a long time. No tears, no movement. Just the weight of everything that had ever been between them pressing down around him. He stepped outside. The day was warm, the sky impossibly blue. The corn swayed gently, whispering a familiar rhythm. He walked to the rose bushes, still dewy from the morning. A single white rose lay on the ground, freshly cut. No note, just the flower. He picked it up and held it close. Weeks passed. The town moved on. People stopped asking about the cook. Some said she'd never existed, that Jack had imagined her. Others remembered her laughter at the diner, her humming in the market, but no one could agree on when she had arrived, or how. Jack didn't offer answers. He kept the cassette player on the kitchen shelf, right beside the apple pie recipe. He still cooked on Sundays, still walked the fence line, but some mornings, just as the sun rose, he paused and listened. Sometimes in the hush of dawn, a voice would ride the breeze, not loud, not haunting, just familiar, and in those moments, Jack didn't feel old or alone. He felt remembered, because somewhere between time and memory, love had made its way home.